Welcome everyone to episode 28 of the Sloth Investor podcast. Once again, I'm joined by my fellow co-host Jay, and we are joined by a very special guest this week, Andrew Hallam. Andrew is a speaker, personal finance journalist, and best-selling author of Millionaire Teacher, Millionaire Expat and Balance. Andrew, it's great to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Roy and Jay, thank you for the invite.
It's a pleasure.
And I'm not sure if our listeners know, but Andrew's a fellow Canadian. He's a West Coast boy. I'm more of a sort of a Toronto area boy, but and our listeners know that I'm an Edmonton Oilers hockey fan, which is sort of closer to Andrew's part of town. Andrew, are you a Canucks fan? Are you a fan of hockey? Does anything like that resonate with you?
I love watching good offensive teams play hockey.
Oh, well, you missed a good game today. Actually, there was a 9-8 overtime game today. So that you talk about high scoring game, pretty crazy.
That's reminiscent of the late 70s and early 80s, right? I mean,
yes,
back to those high scoring games.
Yes, exactly it. The classic Oiler games that would the scores would just absolutely run up. Poor sloth investors over there in sort of trying to pay attention, having no idea what we're talking about.
I know. Andrew, I was going to say, not only am I grateful for you for joining us on the podcast, but I'm finally grateful that we've got someone that can speak to Jay about hockey, because for so many episodes now, I'm like, Jay, I have no idea the terminology. I don't know what you're going on about, but I just nod and agree. I'm like, okay, I get it, Jay. It's fine. So now finally, Jay's got someone to talk to about hockey. It's great. Oh my gosh. Andrew, my first introduction to you was around about a decade ago, and that was through Millionaire Teacher, fantastic book. And something that really resonated with me was your story, and it seems kind of inconceivable to many, but a millionaire mechanic. You speak about Russ, a millionaire mechanic, and the effect that this individual had upon your life. So would you be able to kind of expand upon that for our listeners now?
Russ was like a legend in the garage. Like, I was 19 and I was working a summer job to pay for my college fees. And the other mechanics told me, if Russ ever wants to talk to you about money, make sure you listen to him. And I thought, well, and I asked, like, why? Why would I listen to that guy? They said, because he's a self-made millionaire. He's a single father. He's got a couple of kids, but he's worth over $1 million. This was 1989. That $1 million is a lot of money today, but in 1989 it was a heck of a lot. And one day this guy Russ sat me down and he asked me, "What would you do if I gave you $10,000?" And I thought, "Oh, he's actually going to give me some money. He's going to give me money. I can't believe that. The Millionaire Mechanic is going to give me money. He's going to give me my great start in life." And I said, well, I think I'd put that towards my college fees. And we became friends. And about a year later, he told me, if you told me that you would buy like a stereo, or you'd buy another car, or upgrade your car or whatever, he said, I wouldn't talk to you again unless I had to. So he was a snob in a way. He would, but he taught me, I guess, kind of an inverse snob, not what you'd expect. But he taught me the power of compound interest, and he suggested that when I was 19, I should start saving and investing money right away. And he said that, you could do a job that you want to do. It doesn't have to pay a lot of money, but if you become financially literate and you get money working for you, that you can end up with financial independence far earlier than most people who end up actually earning more money than you. And one of the things that really caught my attention was he said, you don't have to save as much money as most people if you start earlier. You can actually save less money over your lifetime and end up wealthier. So for me, being a little bit lazy, my wife hates it when I say that I'm a little bit lazy, but that really appealed to me.
Can I say that, and our listeners probably know this story, Andrew, but for me, I'm so happy that we were able to secure you on a Sloth Investor, because my investment journey, rather embarrassingly, didn't begin until I went and saw you speak at a school in Hong Kong, maybe about 7 years ago. And until that point, I was giving my money to what I think you term as snakes in suits. Is that the term? And I was giving my money to them, and I had wanted to pull some out to buy some property, and to realize that I was sort of less than what I had put in, and how that was possible during a big bull run. I had no idea. And then my friend Steve, who's in Japan, recommended I go hear you speak, because that would change everything. And he was absolutely right. Watching you speak, and the fact you put it into really simple terms to break it down, made it really accessible. You know, we use the Sloth acronym here, but in education terms, we say KISS, keeping it simple. You prescribe a really simple, accessible strategy. And for me, went back, immediately bought your book, highlighted everything in your book, made a massive change in my life, pulled my money right out. And I had asked the question at the school, what do I do with my money that this broker has? And you said, you've got to start to measure up and ask yourself, is it worth it to take the hit on the penalties versus to leave it with them? No, it was one of those life-changing moments. You talk about the mechanic changing your life, Russ changing your life. Well, for me, that was my Russ moment when I heard you speak.
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's great. It makes my day.
Yeah. And going back to what you mentioned, Andrew, a moment ago about Russ, the millionaire mechanic, I just love as well that you had the presence of mind to kind of respond in that way, because I can think of, notable examples of people that I'm familiar with, that I've read about, who perhaps haven't taken those opportunities, that kind of serendipitous moments that have kind of, more or less fallen in their laps. You had the presence of mind to really, be humble and think about what this person was saying, and to kind of take on board his advice. So I really love that you did that. I think it was really important that you had that presence of mind to notice how important it was what he was talking to you about.
Even at 19 funny. Years of age.
Yeah. I've thought about that, Roy and Jay, before, and I've wondered whether sometimes it's time, chance, and your surroundings at that moment. So, for example, at the time, I'm working with older guys, so this was their full-time gig, and they had families, they were older, and I'm 19, and I think, and I do wonder whether, if it was just Russ working there and the rest of us were just a bunch of young yahoos, would Russ have had that kind of impact on me? It's really so hard to say, but a lot of time, chance, and then that moment of luck where I was ready. But was I ready because of the positive surroundings? The surroundings were just really fertile for that to grab hold. I'm not sure, but I'm sure grateful for it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Something else that really spoke to me when reading Millionaire Teacher, and on occasions I've read it since as well, it's this whole concept as well of spending like you want to grow rich. Okay, so I think for many of our listeners, many of our viewers, they'd be keen to know more from you about that idea of spending like you want to grow rich. Would you be able to expand upon that for our viewers right now?
I think most recently, I read a book about a year ago. It's a book by Jonathan Clements, who was a former Wall Street Journal writer, personal finance writer. And he actually has, and he continues to blog under the Humble Dollar. But in his book, he said something that really thematically resonated with what I was talking about in Millionaire Teacher. He said that if our net worths, our financial net worths, were all reflected on our license plates of each of our cars, that high status cars would cease to be high status. And so by that, it's the idea that most wealthy people don't actually buy expensive cars. Yes, some wealthy people do buy expensive cars, but for the most part, expensive cars are owned by people with really high salaries. And there's a big difference between high salary and high wealth. If you earn $1 million a year and you spend $1 million a year, you're not rich. No matter how much stuff you might have, you're not rich. You're not financially independent. In fact, you're probably in a bit of trouble because you've got this insatiable appetite for more, for stuff, and you're spending everything that you make. What in that book, when I said spend like you want to be rich, the basis of that was Thomas Stanley's research from the Millionaire Next Door, and he and his daughter continued to do that research right up until his death. And I think in 2018, his daughter Sarah Stanley Follow published the next Millionaire Next Door. The data on this is really consistent. It's that if you want to grow wealthy, spend like wealthy people, and wealthy people don't spend like you think they do. Wealthy people spend more than you might think on appreciating assets like businesses, and they spend a lot less than you might think on depreciating assets like vehicles. So in 2018, when millionaires throughout the United States were surveyed, when Sarah Stanley Follow surveyed them, they found that the median millionaire in the United States paid $35,000 on average for their latest car. And the fascinating thing there is, you walk into any upscale parking lot at a shopping center, you're going to see loads of vehicles worth significantly more than $35,000. Yet, how many of them are multimillionaires? Probably a relatively low percentage.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. And moving on to balance, the 4 quadrants to a successful life. This is a concept that you introduced early on in the book. And again, I just think, particularly for young people, okay? So Jay and I both, we're both parents, and I'm thinking of that teenage age as well. I think the 4 quadrants to a successful life is something that I think is really important for young people, all people to know, but particularly young people. Would you be able to expand upon that now, what you meant by the 4 quadrants to a successful life?
I think that, the impetus of that for me was just how warped our traditional definition of success is. Like when you say to somebody, or you say, well, that person's really successful, that guy is super successful. So what makes him successful? You ask that question, and probably respond like, oh, he owns his own law firm, he drives a Maserati, he's got a big mansion on the hill, an absolute success. Okay, so if we went to that person and we asked them, why do you have the Maserati and the mansion on the hill, and why are you super, super ambitious, which are all fine things. But if you ask him or her why, they'll say something like, ultimately it'll come down to life satisfaction. I want to be happy. This gives me life satisfaction. And so I thought about that. Success equals life satisfaction. However, let's dig into what the research actually says about life satisfaction. So life satisfaction, as it relates to money, is a little bit blurred. Life satisfaction as it relates to money increases to a point and then flatlines, and then relative to different levels of income actually ends up dipping. So really high income people typically report slightly lower life satisfaction levels than upper middle class income earners. So yes, money is important as it relates to success. We need enough money for shelter, we need enough money for food and for health, but it's just one of those 4 quadrants that I talked about. So I identified the 4 quadrants as, yes, money, you need enough. Relationships, for sure. Health, and the 4th quadrant would be a sense of purpose. So relationships are so important. Like when we look at Harvard's study of adult development, which is an 8-decade-long study, what they found is the single greatest variable to a happy life wasn't money, it was your relationships with other people. Then you have the health component. You have one vessel, and you have to take care of it. And genetically, we've all been sort of, dealt a different hand. We never know when any of us are going to expire. We don't know what kinds of things might be lurking within us, but we can do our best to try to take care of that vessel to the best of our abilities. And so when I would see traditionally successful people, there was a guy who owned a supermarket chain that I used to work at when I was a kid. And I never saw that guy as successful, even though he was a multi-millionaire, because he'd come in each day and he'd walk around and he didn't smile, and he had this big red face. Like, he was heavy and he had this huge red face. And it was just like the most unhealthy image that I could imagine. So all the money that I saw from him, to me, it didn't make him successful at all. So, and the 4th one is that sense of purpose. Like, we actually need that feeling of some kind of drive to get up in the morning and to actually do things, to feel like we have a sense of accomplishment. So those are the four pillars of success.
Yeah. I was speaking to a friend recently, and an interesting acronym, MAD, make a difference. People want to feel that they can make a difference in their life, and I love that difference. I love that whole idea of, making a difference, MAD. And we're entering a festive season now, and I think that is so critically
important. Hence my
important.
Christmas background.
Hence your Christmas background, Jay. But I think, for young people especially, just to recognize the importance of developing, sustaining those, close family relationships at Christmas time. And when I think back now to when I was younger, do I really remember, what I was given as a gift on one particular Christmas in the 80s or 90s? No, but I remember those warm family moments, whether it's, if a game of Scrabble or a family game, a game of cards, it might have been. Just those moments where we came together as a family, those experiences. And I know that's something you touched upon in the book as well. And that's something we've touched upon in the podcast as well, isn't it, Jay? Just the importance of experiences is really, really critically key. Yeah.
Yeah, and our listeners will know, Andrew, one of the things that I took from your work is that my investments more so go into experiences rather than buying more things in my life. I'd rather have more experience with my kids in particular than I would have things.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Some people have asked me too about fund money. So as you guys know, I have a diversified portfolio of low-cost ETFs, and I'll get asked sometimes, what about fund money? Like, you put a certain amount of money aside for high-risky fund investments. And I say there are no fun investments. If I want fun, I spend that money. That's what fun is.
All right.
Fun,
okay. Yeah.
That's
yeah,
what
yeah.
fun is. Fun is me spending it on an experience.
I like that. Yeah, I like it. Jay and I were speaking recently. There's been, what can I say, a bit of a Pennsylvania theme to our thinking recently. And on our previous podcast, we had Eric Balchunas, who wrote a fantastic book called The Bogle Effect. Plus, of course, I know all three of us, we're fans of the late Jack Bogle, of course. And Vanguard, of course, is the headquarters is in Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. And in your book, Balance, you speak about a particular town in Pennsylvania, Roseto. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Roseto. And for me, when I read about that town in Balance, again, really important lessons that one can learn. And it's just also fascinating to see the kind of changes in the town's trajectory as well. So would you be able to kind of elaborate upon that for our audience now?
Yeah, the town of Roseto was a medical marvel. Yeah. And in the 1950s, a couple of doctors in that town said, what is it with this place? Why do people live so long? He really couldn't figure it out. There were people that smoked and drank, and some of them were overweight. A lot of them were overweight. But he couldn't figure out why things like heart defects were almost non-existent among most people in Roseto, and they lived just freakishly long time. So researchers descended on Roseto to try to figure out what it was. Is it the water? They tested the water, but they found that the water was very similar to the water that would be supplying the surrounding town. So it wasn't that. It obviously couldn't have been diet, because these people ate everything. They ate the good, bad, and the bad. And what they ended up finding in the end was that the difference between Roseto and other places is that it was surprisingly social. So Roseto, the people that had moved there 150 years ago from part of Sicily in Italy. And they kept their old traditions, where they kept a really tight nucleus whereby everybody lived fairly close to each other. Their doors were always open. They were highly social. They were always in and out of each other's homes, kind of like raising each other's kids. It really was like a village raising the children. They had a whole bunch of civic community clubs, far more so than you typically get in a town that size, like the hunting and the fishing club, and then the prayer club, and then the library club. And I mean, they had a club for just about everything, and people all participated. People also walked from place to place because it was tight, kind of like a European town would be. And so everything was nice and tight. And then something ended up happening. today, the people in Roseto don't really live longer than the typical American. What ended up happening was there was a shift in values. So let's look at what the original values were too. The original values were such that if you lived in Roseto in the 50s and the 60s, and before that, if you had enough money to buy a car that was much nicer than your neighbor, you didn't do it. People didn't do it. It was considered distasteful to do that. And so everybody just kind of had the same sort of level of stuff. It wasn't like everybody had the same level of wealth, but everybody had the same kind of level of stuff. And so it was the same with a house. If you could afford a house that was 3 times grander than your neighbor, you didn't typically do that because that was considered in poor taste. And so these people lived in this community, but soon the next generation ended up catching notion of the American dream concept. Like the new generation was saying, well, I want a nicer car, I want a bigger house. So they started to move outside of that nucleus, building places that were further away. They did less walking, obviously, and more driving to get to the store and such. And now, instead of Roseto being a really tight place, it's far more spread out. And today, people don't live any longer than they do in a typical American town. So it aligns so well with Dan Buettner's work on the blue zones. When we look at, instead of this just being an isolated incident, what Dan Buettner wanted to do was look at areas in the world where people lived freakishly long time, and they called them blue zones. And they found that in each case, some of them were vegetarians, but then some of them were like carnivores, and some of them made a fairly high-fat diet, some of them made a low-fat diet. It was really trying to figure out, like, what is the one variable that we can look at here that helps people live the longest? And what it boiled down to was exactly what Roseto had. It was just that highly integrated social fabric. And so, this is a key reason why I have relationships as one of those 4 pillars for success. And that couples so nicely with, Harvard's study on adult development. When they looked at, what is the single greatest variable to a happy life? It's relationships and it's friendships that we have.
It's fantastic. Yeah, really, really great part of the book. And some of our listeners will know this. I've mentioned it a few times within the podcast, but a key reason for my adoption of the sloth, as my spirit animal for investing, is because of a famous quote, a famous reference to being sloth-like by Warren Buffett. I think it's in his 1990 letter to shareholders. He mentions lethargy bordering on sloth remains a cornerstone of our investing philosophy. And towards the end of Balance, I had no idea, but towards the end of Balance, you mention meeting a certain Mr. Buffett. And I think many of our viewers, if not all our viewers, will be really keen to hear more about how that came about and your time with him. So I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit about that now, if you could, Andrew.
I was talking to my students. It was an 11th grade English class. And I said, when you're young, you think you can do anything. And then over time, life starts to beat you down. And sometimes it will be your friends telling you can't do something, or sometimes even your parents. And they're well-meaning, but they don't want you to fail. They don't want you to fall on your face. Sometimes it's jealous people who say, don't apply for Harvard because my sister applied for Harvard. Her GPA was higher than yours and she didn't make it, so you can't make it. So as we go through life, we start out thinking that we have all these great possibilities and anything's possible. And then over time, we put our failures into our future and we put other people's failures into our future. So if we fail at something, we're afraid to try that again. So I was telling my students this, and they asked me, well, what is it that you've wanted to do that you haven't done? And I said, well, I'd like to meet Warren Buffett. So they asked, well, then why don't you? And I said, yeah, that's a really good idea. I should. I actually wanted to meet Warren Buffett and Muhammad Ali. And I ended up writing a postcard. It was a postcard that our school just had its 50th anniversary, and they gave us a bunch of postcards for free. And I took this postcard, and it was this electronic projector, and I said to my students, well, let me write a letter to Warren Buffett. And so, I said, well, I asked the students, like, how should I open this letter, and how should we put this together, and let's see if we can inject some humor, and let's see if somehow through this postcard I can actually meet him. And there's a girl in the back. She put her hand up, and she's like, Mr. Hallam, my mom is head of JP Morgan Chase Asia, and she's wanted to meet Warren Buffett her whole life, and she's never been able to. So, like, with all due respect to you, you're not going to meet him, and definitely not through this postcard. And so I said, well, life is sort of like things that we do in life. Think about a basketball and think about a hoop. And you either take that shot or you don't, but you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take.
Wayne
Right? There we go.
Gretzky, right?
There we go, Jay. There we go, Jay. That was Walter Gretzky. That was Walter Gretzky for the hockey fan people. Walter told his young son Wayne that you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So we took this shot with this postcard, and I sent it. The students all laughed at me, but they thought it was fun. Yeah, so craftiness. So it was brought in a little bit of the English class in there, like, catchy lead, a little bit of humor. And I said to Warren Buffett, like, hey, I'd love to come to the Berkshire Hathaway annual general meeting, but I noticed there are no youth hostels, no hostels in Omaha, and hotel prices are a bit steep. So do you mind if I sleep in your garage or on your sofa? And 8-9 days later, I got an email from the Wall Street Journal. So Warren Buffett had ended up getting the postcard, thought it was hilarious, sent it to his friend at the Wall Street Journal, and she asked if she could write a story about it. So I showed my students this, projected these emails, and they said, well, that's crazy. That's totally crazy. And I said, well, yeah, they want to write a story. What do you think? Should I say yes? And they said, oh my gosh, yeah, you have to say yes. So I said, well, what's my objective here? What was my objective from the beginning? Was it a story in the Wall Street Journal? They said, well, no, it was to meet Warren Buffett. I said, how many people say no to Warren Buffett? What are you going to say no? And I can say, no, I'll say yes conditionally if I can sleep in his garage. And I'll shove aside the lawnmower, and I'll lay my mat down, my Thermarest mat down in between like the lawnmower and the stacks of cherry Coke that I know his wife Astrid buys at Costco in bulk. I know the guy lives on that stuff. And I just thought I was completely nuts. Well, of course, this piques Warren Buffett's curiosity. Now he's got this guy saying no. And so then I'm having an exchange with Warren Buffett, as well as this woman in the Wall Street Journal. My students are seeing all of this stuff. And so long story short, I did end up going to the annual general meeting. I did get a chance to actually meet Warren Buffett. I brought him some gifts, and he and Charlie Munger, the co-chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, and there were just 3 of us in the room, and I had to apologize, actually 4 of us, including me, but I had to apologize to the other guy. So there was Warren Buffett, there was Charlie Munger, the co-chairman, but I didn't have any gifts for the third guy, and I felt kind of badly about that. And I'm like, Mr. Gates, I didn't know you're going to be here. No, I would have brought you something. But yeah, so there's the Warren Buffett story.
That's fantastic.
Get out of town.
I love that. That's a fantastic story, isn't it, Jay? Huh?
I gotta be honest, I didn't know that story. Then when you dropped Mr. Gates, I'm really sorry. Here I was thinking it was gonna be like the reporter or something like that. Oh, you stink.
There was a fun little story associated with this too, because a friend of mine, a guy named Chris Olson, and he worked at Harvard Medical School, and he was in Singapore, where I was actually living at the time. So this whole thing was like, I flew from Singapore and did this crazy red-eye thing to go to the annual general meeting in Omaha. But Chris Olson, he came to visit Singapore a couple of weeks before this, and he was doing some post-tsunami relief work in Aceh, Indonesia. And he brought these little like mannequin dolls. So he was teaching midwives how to give CPR for newborns, and in Aceh, Indonesia. But he wrote this article from the New Yorker, which I thought was really cool, and it was about Bill Gates and the work he was doing with like DDT treated nets in Africa to fight malaria. And the article was super cool, and I kept asking Chris all of these questions, like, well, Chris, like, what's Gates doing with this, or what's Gates doing with that? What does Gates think about this? And Chris, like, look, I don't know. Like, super cool article, but I honestly don't know. And so just to be like a goof, throughout the entire time Chris was hanging with me, I'd say things like, well, you know what, Chris, the next time I see Gates, I'm going to ask him that. I'm going to ask him. And I never stopped. I just kept on saying that. And I mean, I didn't expect to meet Bill Gates 2 weeks later, but I did. And so I ended up asking him some questions. And I called Chris when I got back from Omaha, and I said, Chris, I know what's happening with those DDT treated nets. I know who's making them. And he's like, what are you talking about? I said, well, I asked Gates.
Get out.
Fantastic. It's fantastic.
Oh my gosh.
It was kind of neat.
What a life lived. Just the, those interactions alone right there. Those the sort of life defining moments where you get to sort of have the room with people like that.
So it was fun because when I wrote my books, I always sent Warren Buffett a copy, and I never asked for anything. And I think that's really important. Like a lot of people like that, give to them, but don't ask, because people are always asking for stuff from them. So like I gave them gifts, and like I gave obviously Warren Buffett, I gave him a T-shirt in Thai. It says Coca-Cola in Thai, and, and he's never going to go to Thailand, but Berkshire Hathaway is the largest shareholder of Coca-Cola, and I gave Charlie Munger this shirt that says like Singapore is a fine city. It's no urinating in the elevator, fine $5,000. No spitting, fine $1,000. And Warren, Charlie Munger is known as the abominable no man. So when any deal comes across the desk, Warren Buffett jokes and he says, Charlie just says no. So when I gave him this shirt, I said, I know you're the abominable no man, so I've got this for you. But no, I gave Warren, it was fun to have written those books and then send Warren Buffett a copy and then a little note to thank him just for. I just think the whole bedrock of, more than anything, the emotional equanimity in dealing with the stock market. And how helpful that was, and what an impact that was for me personally. So, yeah, that was important for me to do.
Yeah.
You bring up a good point. One of the things in Millionaire Teacher that you bring up that really spoke to me was the idea first of all, I have to say I love in your book how you section it off to regional investing, and the fact that as a Canadian, I could go to the Canadian section and see what was most applicable to me. I love that fact, and for all our readers, I can't recommend the book enough. You talk about swap-based ETFs, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that and why you like them so much.
Well, I talked about those in Millionaire Expat, so the book that I wrote for expatriates, and I had them in the Canadian section. So
you call it the ultimate legal tax dodge.
Yes. Yeah. So in your case, for example, Jay, you live in Hong Kong. So you live in a capital gains free jurisdiction. You're an expat Canadian. And as an expat Canadian, you don't have to pay capital gains taxes on your growth. However, you do have to pay dividend taxes. And so they come out at source. So if you have ETFs, exchange traded index funds that are listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange, for example, you're going to pay 15% on each dividend. So if you get $1, you're going to get 85 cents. And so, fair enough, the brokerage will take that 15%, basically shifts it off to Revenue Canada, so the Canadian government gets that. But if you purchase a swap-based ETF through Horizon, it's swap-based, so it's not actually held in a physical form. So as a result of that, dividends. The dividends, it's as if the dividends are automatically reinvested, but they're not even reinvested. It's an entity that actually doesn't truly own within it the stocks in a typical index, but the National Bank of Canada promises that you will earn the rate of return as if it had the stocks within it and as if the dividends were reinvested and not taxed. So essentially, Horizons does this in conjunction with the National Bank of Canada. As protection, the National Bank doesn't just say, Jay, I'm just going to give you this return. The National Bank will actually purchase in a physical form an actual physical ETF that mirrors the swap-based ETF. So obviously when this rises and Jay, you want to sell, the National Bank of Canada isn't just like, all right, do we have enough money to pay Jay? We promised Jay that we're going to give him the return of the market, including all dividends without taxes. They do have enough money to sell it because they actually have a mirror product in a physical form. So in your case, Jay, you can invest in these swap-based products and not pay a stitch of tax. So while you are an expatriate, and then even after you move back to Canada, you could have $1 million gain. You can transfer those ETFs back to whatever brokerage you want in Canada, whether that's Quest Trade, Q Trade, RBC's Action Direct, Investors Edge, whatever. You transfer it all across, and you won't pay any money in taxes based on the gains that you made while living abroad. So it's actually quite a sweet product.
And this is in Canada. Can it be found on any other market? Is it out anywhere else?
You can find them on loads of different markets. However, they're known as synthetic ETFs or swap-based ETFs, but I would not recommend them for anyone other than Canadians at this stage.
Really?
And only because there's always that counterparty risk. So how much do you actually trust the institution in terms of knowing that you're going to be able to get that return of that product when you want it and when you sell? So that's what they call counterparty risk. So with a swap-based ETF, there's always that slightly higher risk associated with it. Now, in the case of Horizons products in Canada that list on the TSX, they are backed by the National Bank of Canada, and they are actually purchased in a mirror physical form. And so this we know, and because we know this, we can feel a little bit more comfortable with them than, say, purchasing them off another exchange offered by a different provider where it might be okay, but for the most part, I recommend for most people to buy ETFs in their physical form. So if you go through and look at the model portfolios in Millionaire Expat, every model portfolio in there for every nationality includes ETFs that are only in the physical form. Even under the Canadian section, I'll have the examples under their physical form, except, as you mentioned, there's that one section where I'll talk about the Horizons product, and I do say, well, here is the ultimate legal tax dodge. But I do mention, even in that case, there's a very slight counterparty added risk. So that's up to the investor.
Right. I preach this to all my friends that we don't have to eat that 15% tax that comes off our dividends as an expat investor. Really interesting. I would recommend our readers, when they're reading a Millionaire Expat, that they check out the Canadian section.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. So with regards to the Sloth, one of our key aims is to really appeal to beginner investors. And I just know, just a few days ago, one of my wife's colleagues said to me, okay, I promise this is the first episode I'm going to tune into. I haven't yet been able to tune into your podcast, but I'm going to be tuning into your podcast with Andrew Hallam. And if she's hearing this term index funds, I wonder, Andrew, could you just take a little bit of time to kind of tune in, kind of get her tuned into and understanding the whole concept of an index fund, which you do really well in Millionaire Teacher. So what is an index fund for a truly beginner investor?
An index fund is a product that has a whole bunch of stocks inside it. And so if you bought, for example, a total US stock market index, think of it this way. Think of it as having virtually every stock in the United States all within that same index. So if you buy an index, the US total stock market index, you are literally buying thousands of stocks all at the same time. And internally, nobody trades those shares back and forth. You just own them. That's why it's called a passive investment. Whereas if you buy an actively managed mutual fund, there'll be a professional fund manager who within that fund will be buying and selling individual shares. So they're buying shares that they think will be hot, selling shares that they think will be not. But empirical long-term evidence suggests that if we own a portfolio of index funds, we will beat a portfolio of actively managed funds. It's not intuitive. I mean, it's sort of the opposite of what you'd expect. But an index fund is so cheap to manage. Basically, there's nobody there really managing. You just own the entire market at the lowest possible cost. So it does have a hidden fee, but the hidden fee is really, really, really small. Whereas with an actively managed fund, like if you walked into a general bank or you spoke to a financial advisor, they will always try to sell you an actively managed fund, and there will be a much higher fee attributed to that. So long-term index funds beat over a 10-year period plus about 87 to 90% of actively managed funds. And the actively managed funds that do beat the index funds over that 10-year period aren't the same ones that beat it over the following 10-year period. So if you really want to do well, it's build that portfolio of ETFs or index funds.
And for our Canadian listeners, and I think you highlight this in Millionaire Expat, Canadian investment brokers are some of the highest charges going. They're really high fees, and so an ETF is for our Canadian listeners, again, a really low cost way for you to be doing your investments.
And the thing I really enjoy now is, post 2018, and I mentioned this in Millionaire Expat, the third edition of Millionaire Expat, is they've made it even easier to have a fully diversified portfolio of ETFs. So, for example, traditionally you would have, let's say a Canadian ETF, a US stock ETF, an international stock ETF, and then a bond market ETF. But what iShares and Vanguard and Bank of Montreal has done is they have created all-in-one portfolio ETFs. And so you can buy a Vanguard product under, let's say, the symbol VBAL. And what that includes is it includes the Canadian stock market index within it. It's like a Halloween grab bag of indexes. US index within it, a developed international index, an emerging market index, and a bond market index within it. So VBAL is actually about 60% stocks and 40% bonds. So they have different ones for different tolerances of risk. There are more aggressive ones. VGRO, I believe, is the Vanguard equivalent that has 80% stocks and 20% bonds, and it's all you really need to own. So it's the simplest all-in-one solution. And because it's an all-in-one product, I talk about this in Balance, and I also talk about this in Millionaire Expat, the investor's behavior tends to be much better because the investor doesn't have to worry about which ETF do I buy this month, because they're always buying the same thing, and internally they get rebalanced back to an original allocation. So the investor doesn't need to rebalance anything, never needs to know or worry about which specific ETF to buy in any given month. They just buy that one product every single month, and they're going to be 90% of investment professionals over their lifetime on a risk-adjusted basis by doing nothing, no work at all. So it's a beautiful product.
And you call them, and you called it like, it's called VBAL, Vanguard Balance, and VGRO, Vanguard Grow, is sort of indicative of what the fund's meant to do.
Yeah, that's right.
It's fantastic. Just out of shock, guys, I've got a Christmas tree here, the advent calendars are on the side here. My children are becoming really fascinated and really excited about Christmas. And I just know there's a chance when they see their grandparents, they may receive, perhaps even a little bit of money as well. And Andrew, in Balance, you talk about the decisions that children can take with their money. And I really like that section in particular, particularly as a father myself. So would you be able to kind of expand upon that for our audience as well, the decisions that children can take with their money?
Yeah, are you referring to the three system where we have like? That's
right.
The saving, spending, and the giving away, the charity.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good thing to do for children when they get their allowance or they get cash gifts, to actually have it split into thirds, so that the child ends up putting a third away for designating 1/3 of that money for some kind of charity, like helping somebody else. Where are we going to, and having those discussions, like put this money together and figure out where can we best, who needs this money, who can benefit from having this money. And then 1/3 for the child to spend, so they could spend that immediately. And then 1/3 for the child to save for the future. So that money could be invested in an in-trust account. You'd have to talk to the child to figure out, or at least have them be fully aware of what investing really means. This isn't money that you're just putting away for 2 weeks. What's your time frame for this? So yeah, something that's really good that gives children a high level of cognizance when it comes to money, and then splitting it up for some different elements.
It's fantastic. Great lessons to learn there as well, particularly that aspect of contributing to charities and making sure that they're aware of how they can positively impact other people, and even perhaps animal charities through their own money as well. That's fantastic. Andrew, something that I've always loved about your writing is your ability to use analogies, okay? And there was an Asset Builder article a while ago that you wrote, and you talk about the Norse god Loki. And I love that. As soon as I read that, I thought, wow, this is great. This really resonated with me. And you just speak about how, Loki can really teach investors a great deal about the pitfalls of investing, and the whole behavioral aspect as well comes into play. So could you kind of expand upon that now for our audience?
Yeah, let's see. I use Loki, and I know that in many cases, many people have watched like the Avengers series. So Loki and Odin and the characters, they're basically Norse gods. But in the Avengers series, Loki is Odin's adopted son. And I ask investors to imagine this, that Odin, sort of the god of all gods, he says to Loki, who's a mischievous character, he says, okay, look, Loki, here's the deal. Over any 30-year duration, first of all, I'm going to put you in charge of the stock market. So Loki, you are in charge of the stock market. But over any 30-year duration, stock market has to average between 8 to 11%. It has to. And if it doesn't, Loki, Loki, you're in charge of it, you can make it go up and down. But if it doesn't average between 8 to 11% during any 30-year period, your history, Loki. We're gonna drop you in a volcano. You're done. And so Loki doesn't want people to really be successful, because Loki's this god of mischief. So Loki figures, wow, if I make this as volatile as possible, I can freak people out. I can try to make sure that almost nobody gets a 30-year return between 8 to 11%. I'll create big drops, and then I'll suck people in with really high consistent gains, and then I'll pull the rug from under their feet, and I'll make them sell at a low and quit, because behaviorally they're going to freak out. The thing to remember, the thing that's really important, is that there's virtually no calendar year that earns a 9 or a 10% return. Like over my lifetime, I think it happened once. I think only once in my lifetime there was a return, a calendar year return that was between, say, like 9 and 11%. I think it might have been like 1987. It was a return of 10.16% or something like that. The rest of the time, the stock market's completely schizophrenic. And I get a kick out of, like, a lot of new investors will say, well, the market's supposed to return 10% a year, but the last couple of years it hasn't. It's been really volatile. Those are people who don't get it. The market has never hit you with a 10% return every year. Clunk, 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 another 10, another 9, and 8, another. No, because Loki's in charge. So Loki wants to absolutely mess with your mind to make you do silly things, to make you quit investing, to make you ridiculously greedy when markets are rising, and ridiculously fearful when markets are dropping. So the best thing to do is to try to ignore Loki, ignore the markets, ignore all market news, ignore all forecasts, just have that diversified portfolio of ETFs or that all-in-one portfolio, and just add money whenever you have it. So whether that's every month, you get a lump sum. I sold, Pelly and my wife and I sold a condominium this year. There's no question of when to put the money in the market. I put the money in the market as soon as I have the money. I'm not letting Loki pull me by the short and curlies.
That's fantastic.
That's that lump sum versus sort of trickle drip feed investment strategy. And I know you also wrote about that on Asset Builders as well, sort of what's the best strategy. But one of the things that, as you're telling that story, I'm just shaking my head because about 20 years ago, I was a teacher at German Swiss International School, and one of the parents in my classroom was a banker, and he said, look, you can't go wrong. I was asking him, being naive, what do I do? And he goes, well, there's these new things it's called an index fund, and you can, they're not readily available, but you can find them on boom.com. So I went on boom.com and I bought them. And I remember about a month into it, I wrote him a message and I said, oh, it's going down. Should I be concerned? And again, much to my chagrin, I got scared and I backed out and I pulled it out because it was too volatile for me. And man, I'll tell you, my life would be a lot different had I just stuck with that strategy 20 years ago and not got spooked by the sort of the Loki effect that transpires in the stock market.
Yeah. And Andrew, you write about this as well. I think you've written about it in at least one or two of your books. You speak about the fact that, invariably we're in a mall, we're in a shopping center, and when products go on sale, we jump at the chance. Wait, hey, 20, 30%, products on sale is great. But yet that's one of the great paradoxes about the stock market is that we really should be grateful, particularly the younger you are, the better. You should be grateful when there's a 10, 15, 20% decline in the market. But yet that's when Loki, gets the better of us. And we see so many investors kind of shudder and think, what's the right thing to do here? When they really should be taking advantage of that, price decline. Something that really resonated with me from The Bogle Effect, a book I recently read, was Jack Bogle spoke to the author about this whole concept of relative predictability. And that's the great thing that he believed that he had taught investors. The fact that, yes, while there will be declines, perhaps once every 4 years, invariably over time, on average, the stock market, will go up. And like you mentioned, it's rarely in one particular year, you're not going to get an 8 to 10% return. But over time, there's that average of between 8 to 10%. And just that whole idea of relative predictability, that over time, the stock market's gradually moved up and up and up, is something that I really enjoyed reading, and just kind of that behavior aspect. And I just think the index fund just works wonders for the whole kind of behavior side of things. And what was also interesting to me was Michael Lewis. So Michael Lewis is the author of The Big Short and Moneyball. And you might think someone like that, who's such a savvy financial author, he could have perhaps access to kind of the most intricate and complex financial tips and advice. Michael Lewis invests in index funds. Michael Lewis keeps it simple. And I just love that as well, because Michael Lewis, when interviewed for the book, he says, what I love about index funds, it just enables me to switch off and to spend time on the things that I want to spend time on, leisure pursuits, family. And I just love, again, how index funds enable you just to have, a better night's sleep. It's that whole concept of simplicity that I think, no doubt, I'm sure you could appreciate as well, both of you as well. Yeah.
Yeah, even, I think even more impactful than Michael Lewis doing that is the idea that Warren Buffett, in his, what he is entrusting that his estate be invested in a portfolio of index funds for his wife after he dies. And you think, well, Warren Buffett has access to all kinds of people, top hedge fund managers and all kinds of private equity managers, but he knows that the odds of success are far higher for that money after he's gone in a simple portfolio of index funds for his wife. So that's generally where it's going, and that's the advice that he gives other investors as well.
Yeah, I love that. Also, I think you touched upon this it was even an article or perhaps one of your books as well, but Google. So when Google were about to kind of commence their IPO, they realized that so many of their employees would become, quite wealthy. And wisely, the leaders of Google at the time wanted to ensure that their employees, didn't spend their money in foolish ways and invested wisely. And I believe they brought in some, 3 or 4 investment gurus, Nobel Prize winners in to talk to their employees about that as well. So I just love the fact as well that, we've got, people at Google who also, of course, invest in index funds as well. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that and impressed by that. Sergey Brin and Larry Page, just before the public was going to, or the Google was going to go public, you have all of these employees that were all of a sudden going to be multimillionaires. And, you had a whole series of financial advisors basically circling Google like sharks.
Yeah.
And they were realizing, wow, we're going to get these Google clients. We're going to make a ton of money for ourselves. And Larry Page and Sergey Brin said, no, hang on. You're not allowed into Google to talk to any of our employees until we've educated our employees. So yeah, that was exactly it. He brought Nobel Prize winners in economics in to talk about the efficient market theory, to talk about how the odds of investing with index funds will be and give you far higher statistical probabilities of success than with anything else. And then once he'd educated them, he opened up the door to the sharks. They came in and they were thoroughly disappointed because they couldn't pick up clients.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Good business. It's a good business caring for their workers.
Brilliant. If only every company, if every school, if every organization could be as wise as that. What a fantastic lesson to learn. It's brilliant. Now, guys, Andrew and Jay, as you know, we're not far away from Christmas. We're really getting into the spirit of the festive season here. Jay, particularly with your backdrop, I'm very impressed by it today. I'm outnumbered by Canadians, quite frankly. It's 2-1 here. So I need to know from you guys, are there any Canadian kind of festivities, traditions, customs I don't know about during the festive period? What would you say?
I would say Nathan Phillips Square is a big one that I miss back home. It's sort of the big skating rink in Toronto, and I guess they have the equivalent in New York where you skate at Times Square. And it's back on now after being shut down for a couple of years due to COVID, but I miss that. The lights, the cold air, skating in downtown Toronto, just a magical, and just the fresh Christmas trees in everyone's houses. When you go to someone's house and you, as a kid, we have a fresh Christmas tree right now in our house, and here in Hong Kong, and just the smell every morning when I wake up and I walk out, immediately it brings back, it makes me reminisce about when I was a kid. So I really like that too. Andrew, what about you?
I remember like in and around the Christmas time, just when the snow would be falling and it would be hitting the telephone wires, and just the sizzling, everything was silent because like the sound of like sounds, just snow just sort of it kind of just dampens everything.
Yeah, so eats the sound, right?
No sound, and I could just hear the sizzling of the snows. Yeah, I guess technically, Roy, you're not really outnumbered by Canadians because I guess I'm 50-50. I give you guys half on each side because I was actually born in the UK.
Oh, really?
Wow.
So I didn't get Canadian citizenship until I was 18. So yeah, we're all relatively evenly matched here, other than the
I didn't know that. That's fascinating, Andrew. I did not know that. That is fascinating. Wow. Yeah. Now, Andrew, I couldn't. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just about to say. So, of course, like I guess I could talk like what would have been back when we were kids, First Division, which is now Premier Football as well. So, Nottingham Forest, which is where I was born in Nottingham. Nottingham Forest winning the European Cup. This kind of thing was really exciting. So So I'm on both fences with you guys.
Yeah,
it is a true 50-50 split.
50-50 split.
Andrew, something just occurred to me in terms of Nottingham. Of course, you would know about the Robin Hood reference, and the fact that no doubt, for so many people around, expatriates in particular, you've kind of enabled them to kind of invest in a wise way and avoid the snakes in suits. And I kind of like the fact that, in terms of thinking about like, steal from the rich, ensuring snakes in suits don't get their money, and you're enabling them to invest in that wise way. So that just occurred to me as well, that kind of analogy to kind of Robin Hood as well. So the Robin Hood of the investing world. Yeah, absolutely. Now, Andrew, I could never be accused of not reading every single page of a book. And in particular, I love the fact that towards the very end, in fact, it's in the About the Author section of Millionaire Teacher, you mentioned the fact that you and your wife, you love to explore hidden and not so hidden corners of the globe, while avoiding cold winters whenever you can. So are you avoiding a cold winter in 2022?
Yeah, I will avoid every cold winter.
Yeah.
So we're currently in Panama City, and we'll be spending this winter, we really don't live anywhere.
Yeah.
So we've been globally nomadic since 2014. And our intention was to take like 1 year off. Like I really enjoyed teaching. It wasn't like I decided I'd quit because, you know, I had enough money to quit. We just thought we'd take 1 year off, and 1 year led to 8. So yeah, currently we are in Panama City, and we'll be going up to the mountains in Panama shortly, in a couple of months time. But yeah, for now, this is where we are. We'll spend spring in Spain and France, and then in the fall, there's that tentative thing there's that thing that we haven't yet done that we really wanted to do. I talked about this both in Balance, and maybe I talked about it in the 3rd edition of Millionaire Expat, but my wife and I would love to drive a vehicle down to Argentina. So we made an attempt at that in 2017. Really took our time. It wasn't like the destination was, you know, the most important part. We spent 17 months just getting to El Salvador. We spent 10 months in Mexico alone. And then there was some civil unrest in Nicaragua. So we ended up sort of doing a U-turn and meandering back to Canada, where we parked the van and then went off and did something else. But we would like to do that, finish that.
Yeah. I love that. And that's one of the things I loved about Balance Talk, because early on you speak about, you know, kind of, you know, the escapades you got into with a friend. I think it was in Cuba, you got into a tricky situation whereby there was a lady not quite recognizing a dollar bill, or she thought it was counterfeit. But again, you make the point quite wisely that, you know, it's those experiences that at the time they seem quite hairy and quite scary, but you know, when you look back at them in retrospect, they're just so memorable, and they bind you to friends and family members, and that's what you remember, you know, in future years. So that was a fantastic section of the book as well. It really was brilliant.
So true.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. We've really enjoyed talking to you, and it's a great way to close the podcast for 2022. And yeah, Jay, go ahead.
Andrew, for the people who are listeners who are interested in following your work, how can they find you?
At andrewhallam.com, there's a subscribe button there too. So, you know, you can get the weekly articles that I write into your email box by subscribing at andrewhallam.com.
But they can also find you on YouTube, on Facebook. You run a Facebook group. Do you want to those?
Yeah, there's a Facebook group for expats and international educators for financial advice. And so there's that. There's just a really great, growing, helpful community. So yeah, joining that group's a really good idea, especially if you're an expat. So it's a expats and international teachers, international or financial advice Facebook group.
Great, awesome. Well, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure. I know from my own experience to be able to talk to you firsthand after you being such a strong influence on my financial literacy. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well. Yeah,
my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Andrew, and all the best for a lovely Christmas and a fantastic New Year in 2023. Okay.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays, everyone. Bye for now.